There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." And he said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." This is the word of the Lord.
My first summer with you, I was invited to a writing workshop at St. John's College in Minnesota. We sat as a group of writers every morning being led by a facilitator through writing prompts. Now, some of the writing prompts were straightforward and traditional, like, when I was a kid, I used to like to do this, ... and then you go, begin writing. Others were a little bit strange to me. We would hold objects in our hands and notice how there was protrusions or how there was empty spaces or what have you. And then the author, the facilitator, said, "Write into the empty space." I wasn't exactly sure what she meant, but one of my cohorts chimed up. She had heard this NPR story on the drive to the workshop about a neurological scientist who studied the question of why does music make us dance? The example reported that day in our little writing circle was the song "Happy" by the musician Farrell. You know that song, don't you? It goes, "I'm happy, happy." I don't know any of the other words, but whenever it's on the radio in the car, I would sing, "I'm happy," like a big nerd going all over the highway in Atlanta. Sure enough, that song, like other R&B pieces, hip-hop, soul music, country, jazz, what have you, there's something about all of it that makes us want to get down. In fact, my colleague got so excited about the story that she could share with the class, she pulled out her smartphone, opened it to NPR, and found the name of the neuroscientist Maria Witek, and she quoted her as saying this: "Gaps in the rhythmic structure, gaps in the sort of underlying beat of the music that sort of provides us with an opportunity to physically inhabit those gaps with our own bodies." You didn't see what I did with my feet. It was really exceptional. In other words, friends, space. Space between musical notes, creating rhythms. The space makes us want to groove. Space between things. It's an interesting thing to think about. You can learn all kinds of things about the world by examining space. The space between homes creates the opportunity for a neighborhood, and even more so for community. The space between dance partners often tells a story. It could be a story about love. It could be a story about passion. Sometimes it's a story of simple interest, and there are other sad times when it's a story about disinterest. I had a high school girlfriend, and she was a student at a Christian high school, and that school was rather strict. They did not want to throw a prom. So the parents decided they would throw a prom for the students off-site, and they compromised with the school by suggesting that they would only play Christian music at the dance. Oh my. My girlfriend and I tried to dance, but it's hard to dance to songs about my Savior's blood, atoning sacrifices. Every now and again, some silly father would get on the microphone and say that cheesy phrase, "Keep enough room for Jesus." It was as if at the end we didn't have enough arm space between us. We had to keep scooting further and further back. I remember that summer there was a song by a band called Sixpence None the Richer called "Kiss Me." That song was their only secular hit, and so we found that CD and asked for the DJ to play it on repeat. Later, I found my girlfriend's mother at the punch bowl, and she said, "Are you enjoying yourself?" I said, "Sure am." She said, "Well, what do you think of the music?" I said, "Well, to be honest, it's a bit hard to dance to Christian music." And she said, "Well, Jared, don't you want the presence of Jesus with you even in the romantic times?" No. Was my 17-year-old answer. Not really. Now, sometimes the space between things is quite large, chasm-like, really. I remember the first time I was at Loch Ness. I stayed in a youth hostel on the beach right there next to the water. And on both sides of the water, the terrain goes straight up into mountains. On my side, I went ahead and took the several hours to climb the mountain. I got to the very top. I looked across that great chasm to the other side, and I could see rolling green hills for as far as the eye could see. I turned behind myself, and I looked this way, and I saw rolling green that always opened itself up into jagged rocks and granite. It's beautiful. I took note of the difference. Climbed back down and saw someone at the hostel who knew the area well, and I said, "The landscape's completely different." I said, "Oh yes, that's actually quite right, that some time ago, two pieces of land from two separate continents broke off, and they smashed into each other in the sea. And this created this deep, cavernous lake called Loch Ness." Made me wonder, that chasm, who walked on the side with rolling green hills? What creatures traversed that land? Who walked on the side with the rocks? What creatures were there before these two merged together in their ancient geographic waltz? Now, space is interesting to study. But when we study the space that separates human beings, sometimes we are brought great concern. Jesus was concerned with the space that existed between Jewish people and Samaritan people. St. Paul, well, he was really concerned with the space, the separation, if you will, between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. It formed the basis for his ministry, in fact. And before these two men, Isaiah was really bothered at the created space, the chasm, if you will, that the people of God made with the foreign people when it came to worship in the temple. It upset Isaiah dearly. I think today, this week, you and I, we all have seen more incidences of separation. We've seen yet again more African Americans shot. Now, those events, the public outcry, protests, suspicion of police officers, support of police officers, it all reveals to this young preacher that in our own day, days that have come so long after that Constitution was signed, that document that said we're all made equal, in our own day, days so far removed from the Gettysburg Address, that in our day, which is a day so long away from when King told the country that he had a dream, that in our day, which is still actually quite a bit of ways in the future from when we would inaugurate our first African American president, it reveals that in our day there are still places in our society where a gap persists between those some people would call the majority and those others would call the minority. And I would like for this church to reflect together, to collectively sit in the awkwardness and realize and think that there are, even in this community, brothers and sisters who are in the category that we would call minority, who've decided to come and make their faith home here, where people, the majority that is, don't look like they look. Can we just note how courageous that is? How faithful? How difficult? I love the response, though. There is a gap. And the response, instead of shying away from the space, is to lean into it with their own lives, to enter into the difference, to dance into the difference with their own bodies. If I'm being confessional for a moment, I will tell you that most of the communities that I've been a part of in my life have looked like me. I have looked like the majority. So I'm impressed when people who don't enter into ours. Friends, when we read this gospel lesson this morning, we cannot help but see this space, this chasm, this lacuna really, that really exists between certain kinds of people. There's a poor beggar named Lazarus. He's covered with sores, head to toe, and these parasitic and ravenous dogs come about, looking all over him for some sort of sickly sustenance. And all he wants is just one scrap of food, just one morsel of it. Let it fall from someone's plate and I'll eat it like a dog on the floor, thinks Lazarus to himself. And then there's this unnamed rich man who could help him out, but he doesn't. There is a space between these guys. It is a space that is at once physical, kind of like how most of us here live in nicer neighborhoods, not poor ones, certainly not transitional ones either. That's the nice word we've come to use. The space is also relational. I mean, the rich man, I suppose, like many of us, certainly like myself, is not quite sure how to even talk to somebody who's living in the gutter. There are wealthy people here today. There are needy people here today, too. And sometimes our homeless friends come to worship with us. Don't you just get a little, if you're honest, a little nervous about that? You wonder what's going to happen in the gathering space after service when that space is broken and we are slammed together. What will they ask me? How will I respond? Is there someone else I can talk to? Don't you find it hard to talk to the beggar, to negotiate with the panhandler? Or even do you find it intimidating to be in conversation with someone who's been formed by the ghetto? This past summer, I was asked by one of our deacons, Bo Howard, to come to his new law office and to bless it. And I brought some fellows. We did that. We shared the time of prayer. We shared communion. And then we decided we'd go out to some restaurant that lawyers like to go to downtown and eat. Not sure why I wanted to go to that restaurant, but... So we're walking up the hill on this really hot and windy day. I remember it was really windy, so much so like dust was flying into my eyes. There's a couple homeless friends sitting in a doorway trying to get out of the wind. No doubt the door behind them was locked. And Bo was talking about this restaurant that we were going to. He was telling the group of us, and he said, worst case scenario, if it's closed, there's a 24-hour diner over here. And that homeless friend was so sharp and quick-witted, he goes, worst case scenario? And Bo responds, good point. Not worst case scenario for you, but good point, and thanks for a reminder, and we scampered off. I promised him that would make a sermon one day. The truth is revealed in that story that is revealed in this text. There is a chasm that exists between haves and have-nots And this was even more so the case in Jesus' parable. Now, if we read it carefully, we get the point. Jesus' attitude about this injustice, that is to say, the indifference of wealthy people for those who are down and out. Jesus' attitude about them is quite on the nose. He doesn't like it. It upsets him. And we see that in the way he tells the story. You see, it's weird because the poor man has a name. The rich man is nameless in his story. That's strange, for in the ancient world, just like our own world today, it's the wealthy people who get named and the poor people whose names get forgotten. Again, Jesus' attitude is on the nose. He tells a parable about the afterlife to describe the situation, and it's filled with both perdition and peace. The rich man, you see, is in torment, and there is a chasm between him and Lazarus, who is in peace. What is this text not? Well, it's certainly not a parable that attempts to explain the ontology of hell. It is a story about God's attitude to that indifference that sometimes happens where wealthy folks don't look so well upon the poor. Again, it's a story that says God does not approve. But maybe if we step back for a moment and say, in some way, this does indirectly tell us something about a hellish existence. For hell is nothing more than separation from God, and hell is also separation from one another. You might say that hell is where relationships are completely wrecked without hope of restoration. I'm reminded of that cartoon, maybe you've seen it, about hell. There are a bunch of people in a place with a long table, and it's filled with such delicious food. It's a sumptuous and scrumptious feast. Everybody there has one ailment. They have no elbows. Their arms are locked like this, and so they go around the table looking to pick up a morsel, something good, a drumstick maybe, or a loaf of bread, and they can pick it up, but they can't quite get the food to their mouths. Frustrating. Hell. It's usually accompanied by the cartoon about heaven. It's the same space, same delicious table, same problem, no one has elbows. But there in heaven, the people aren't concerned with putting the food to their own mouths, they just simply feed each other. It's natural that in the story, the rich man, after receiving his just deserts, that he wishes to find a way to traverse the gap, the chasm that exists between him and death and his family who are still living, because he wants to speak to them about how serious all this business is. He wishes to find a way to tell his parents and his brothers and his sisters, hey, decrease the distance between you and those in need. Step into the gap for those who have no voice and speak up for them. Care for others. Cross the chasm. No is the answer given to him. So he comes up with more ideas. He thinks, well, what if we can do something that's rather Jacob Marley-esque? You know, from Dickens's A Christmas Carol. Send ghosts or spirits. May it not be me, but send someone else. No, he is told. You see, your family, they've got Moses, they've got the law, they've got the prophets. And in the law and the prophets, the truth has been made plain from the very beginning. God's thoughts on the issues are clear, and they've always been clear. You make certain that you cross the chasm of life and history to help those who are down and out. You make certain that you stand in the gap for those who have needs. You dance into the difference. For you, my friends, dance to the beat of a very unexpected drummer. God bless you.